Beneath the crowded streets of America, past the traffic lights, the restaurants, and the endless noise of the city, there lies another world. It is dark, wet, and rarely seen, a hidden network of tunnels where most people would never dare to go. For nearly a century, whispers have claimed that something impossible is living down there. Not rats, not stray cats, but massive alligators, crawling through the shadows beneath our feet. It sounds like pure fiction, a wild story meant to entertain children or thrill tourists. Yet, again and again, reports have surfaced. Strange sightings, newspaper headlines, and eyewitness accounts that refuse to die. Could it be true that America's largest city hides prehistoric predators in its sewers? Or is this simply one of the greatest urban legends ever told? Tonight, we are diving deep into the mystery of the sewer gators. And by the end, you may find yourself wondering what is really lurking under our streets. Beneath the everyday noise of American cities, hidden under layers of concrete and asphalt, lies a network of tunnels that most people rarely think about. These are the sewers, vast underground rivers of waste, pipes twisting like veins beneath our feet. Millions of people walk across manholes and storm drains every single day without giving them a second thought. Yet for nearly a century, a story has haunted these hidden passages. A story so strange, so unbelievable, that it has become one of America's most enduring urban legends. This is the legend of the sewer alligators. The tale often begins in New York City, the beating heart of American culture and commerce. With its millions of residents stacked inside high-rise apartments, its constant hum of traffic, and its endless flow of energy, the idea that something wild and monstrous could be hiding just beneath its streets almost sounds impossible. And yet, for decades, whispers have suggested exactly that. Strange shadows, glowing eyes, and reptilian shapes moving in the tunnels. These accounts fuel the belief that alligators, creatures usually associated with the warm swamps of Florida, have somehow taken root in the cold, dark underworld of Manhattan. But how could such a story even begin? To answer that, we need to travel back in time to the early 20th century, when exotic animals were a fashionable novelty. In those days, it was not uncommon for families returning from vacations in Florida to bring back baby alligators as souvenirs. Imagine a child tugging at their parents' sleeves, pointing at a tank filled with squirming reptiles in a roadside stand, begging to take one home. The baby alligator, only a few inches long, seemed harmless enough, a living toy from the tropics. For a time, it would swim in a bathtub or splash in a small backyard pool. But baby alligators do not stay small for long. They grow, and they grow quickly. Within a few years, the once cute pet could reach 3, 4, even 5 feet in length, with powerful jaws, sharp teeth, and a wild temperament that no family could control. Faced with a dangerous and unmanageable animal, many owners had no idea what to do. And so, according to legend, they made a fateful decision. They flushed the alligator down the toilet. At first glance, this sounds absurd, yet countless retellings insist it happened. And once these animals were sent into the labyrinth of pipes and sewers, the story suggests they did not die. They survived. Down in the damp, filthy dark, they found a new home. They're hidden from the sunlight, away from the eyes of humans. They began to grow. From that point on, the legend began to take on a life of its own. People began to whisper about creatures living in the shadows, reptiles that did not belong in the north, thriving in conditions no one thought possible. Over the years, these whispers transformed into reported sightings. Newspapers printed shocking stories. Workers shared terrifying tales, and soon, the idea of sewer gators became firmly embedded in the folklore of New York. But the question remains, is there any truth to this story? Could it be possible that beneath the most modern and advanced city in America, prehistoric predators are crawling through the pipes, unseen yet always present? Or is it nothing more than a tale told to thrill children and tourists, a legend that survived because it was too entertaining to let die? That is where our journey begins. In this series, we will explore the origins of the sewer gator legend, the eyewitness accounts that kept it alive, the scientific explanations that challenge it, and the cultural reasons why this story continues to fascinate people to this day. The truth, as you'll discover, may be stranger than you think. To truly understand the legend of the sewer alligators, We need to place ourselves in the mindset of Americans during the early 20th century. It was an age of fascination with the exotic, when circuses, carnivals, and traveling shows brought wild animals from distant lands into the spotlight. For families living in bustling northern cities, the chance to own a small piece of that wildness was irresistible. Florida, with its subtropical climate and sprawling wetlands, became a popular vacation destination for adventurous travelers. Roadside stands along highways often sold unusual souvenirs, shells, tropical fruits, and, most surprisingly, live baby alligators. For just a few dollars, a family could purchase a living reptile to carry back home as the ultimate conversation piece. At first, the idea seemed harmless, even charming. The alligator was tiny, often no longer than a pencil. Its scaly skin and toothy little grin made it appear almost cartoonish. In apartments across New York and other northern cities, children delighted in watching their new pet splash in bathtubs or crawl across the floor. Guests marveled at the strange creatures, asking questions and daring each other to touch them. For a short time, it was an entertaining novelty, but the amusement never lasted. Alligators are not designed to be domestic companions. They are wild predators with powerful instincts, and within months, they began to outgrow the bathtubs and basins that once contained them. By the time the animals reached 3 or 4 feet in length, their owners faced a crisis. These were no longer cute little pets. They were dangerous. Their bites could cause serious injury. Their strength made them unpredictable, and their constant need for food created endless challenges. Most city apartments had no space for a reptile that size, and most families had no desire to risk being bitten. What began as a novelty quickly became a burden. And this is where the legend takes its fateful turn. Faced with the impossible question of what to do with their unwanted pets, many owners allegedly chose the most convenient escape. They carried their alligators to the bathroom, lifted the toilet lid, and with one final flush, sent the creatures swirling away into the hidden underworld of the sewers. The idea itself is chilling. A pet, once held in the hands of a child, released into darkness, dropped into a world of filth and rushing water. What happened to them next? Did they drown, unable to adapt? Or, as the legend suggests, did they cling to life, crawling through pipes, fighting their way into larger tunnels, and eventually establishing themselves in an environment no one imagined they could survive? Stories began to circulate, whispered first by children, then passed among adults. They spoke of monstrous reptiles lurking beneath the streets, growing larger with each passing year. Some versions of the tale claimed they survived on a steady diet of rats, multiplying as quickly as their prey. Others painted them as ghostly creatures, their skin bleached pale by years in the absence of sunlight, their eyes glowing eerily in the dark. In every version, the image was terrifying. Predators that did not belong, thriving where they should not exist. By the 1930s, these whispers had begun to make their way into print. Newspapers in New York occasionally ran sensational stories of sewer workers spotting large reptiles in the underground tunnels. The most famous of these came in 1935, when reports claimed that teenagers shoveling snow near a manhole discovered an 8-foot alligator lurking beneath the surface. The boys allegedly dragged the creature out, stunned it with shovels, and killed it before anyone could verify the truth of what they had seen. Though many doubted the story, the headline was enough to fuel the imagination of an entire city. From that moment on, the legend was alive. Sewer workers began to share their own eerie encounters. Shadows that moved against the walls, tails vanishing into the water, strange splashes in places where no fish should swim. Most officials dismissed the accounts as exaggerations, but the workers insisted on what they had seen. And as the tale spread, the idea of a secret population of alligators living beneath New York began to sink deep into the city's folklore. It is important to pause here and ask, why did this story capture so many imaginations? Perhaps it was because it reflected something deeper about urban life. The sewer was a place of mystery, a world hidden just below the surface, dark and dangerous. To imagine it filled with monsters was both horrifying and thrilling. It allowed city dwellers to wonder about what might exist in the unseen spaces of their world. The image of pets gone wild, transformed into predators beneath the city, carried a warning too. It was a reminder of the consequences of human carelessness. By treating exotic animals as toys, People may have unleashed something they could not control. Whether or not the story was true, it carried the weight of possibility. And possibility, as we will see, is the fuel that keeps urban legends alive. By the time the 1930s gave way to the 1940s, the story of the sewer alligators had already grown beyond a whisper. It was no longer just a rumor passed among children or a cautionary tale told by parents. It had entered the pages of newspapers, the conversations of city workers, and even the files of local officials. New York City, with its endless underground maze of tunnels, became the stage for one of America's most bizarre urban mysteries. One of the earliest and most persistent claims came from men who worked in the sewers themselves. These were not tourists or thrill seekers, but ordinary laborers, people tasked with clearing blockages, repairing pipes, and keeping the underground system flowing. They were familiar with the shadows and the dangers of their work, from collapsing tunnels to toxic gases. Yet, even they admitted there were moments when something felt different. They told stories of hearing splashes in places where no water should move, of catching glimpses of something scaly slipping into the darkness, of eyes that reflected light in unnatural ways. Some dismissed these accounts as imagination, tricks of poor lighting, fatigue, or fear. But the stories came again and again from different workers in different neighborhoods. And while no one could capture undeniable proof, the consistency of the descriptions kept the legend alive. Something, they insisted, was moving through the tunnels, something that did not belong. The newspapers, always hungry for stories that would capture attention, wasted no time in printing these accounts. Headlines screamed of sewer monsters and reptiles beneath the streets. One article claimed that sewer inspectors had encountered creatures more than 6 feet long, lurking in the filthy water. Another reported that entire nests of reptiles had been discovered, feeding on rats and garbage. Though officials denied such reports, the sensational stories sold papers, and once a legend appears in print, it becomes harder to ignore. Perhaps the most famous of these reports was the tale of February 1935. According to the story, a group of teenagers in East Harlem were shoveling snow into a storm drain when they noticed something moving below. At first, they thought it was debris caught in the current, but as they peered closer, they saw scales, claws, and teeth. What they claimed to have dragged out was an 8-foot alligator, writhing and snapping in the freezing air. Unable to control it, they allegedly killed the creature with shovels before anyone else could see it alive. The story spread quickly, and though skeptics questioned every detail, the image of a massive reptile crawling out of New York's underworld was too powerful to forget. For many, it was proof that the impossible was, in fact, real. If one alligator had survived down there, who was to say there were not more? By the 1950s and 1960s, the legend had fully taken root in the city's imagination. Police officers reported receiving calls from frightened residents who claimed to have seen reptiles slithering into storm drains. Children dared each other to peer into manholes, hoping to glimpse the glowing eyes of the creatures below. And writers began to spin the tale into books and essays, cementing the sewer gator as part of New York's folklore. One particularly influential figure was Robert Daly, who in 1959 published A World Beneath the City. In it, Daly described conversations with sewer workers who swore they had seen alligators in the tunnels. According to these accounts, the animals had adapted in bizarre ways. Some had lost their eyesight in perpetual darkness, while others grew pale, their skin bleached by the absence of sunlight. Daly's descriptions painted an eerie picture of a hidden ecosystem, a world where reptiles from the tropics had transformed into ghostly monsters in the depths of Manhattan. Of course, scientists and city officials repeatedly pushed back against these claims. Alligators, they pointed out, were cold-blooded reptiles. They required warmth to survive, and the freezing winters in New York should have been fatal. The sewers, far from being warm, were filled with cold water, chemicals, and little food. From a biological standpoint, the idea of a thriving population of reptiles in such an environment was nearly impossible. But science does not always silence a good story. And the sewer gator story was a great story. It had everything: danger, mystery, the thrill of the unknown. It gave people a monster to imagine, lurking just out of sight, in a place everyone knew existed but few had ever seen. The very idea that beneath their feet while they walked to work or sat in a diner, enormous reptiles might be swimming in the dark. It was both terrifying and fascinating. Even as the years passed, the legend refused to fade. Instead, it adapted, just like the creatures it described. Each generation added new details, new encounters, and new warnings. Sewer gators became part of American culture, showing up in cartoons, comic books, and even late-night comedy routines. The line between fact and fiction blurred, and the truth became harder to pin down. But perhaps that is the true power of this legend. It does not need proof. It only needs possibility. The moment people ask, what if? The story is already won. And so the question remains, were these shadows in the tunnels real creatures, born of human carelessness and survival against all odds? Or were they simply illusions, rats mistaken for reptiles, stories inflated with each retelling, myths that grew larger than the truth? In the darkness of sewers, where few dare to go, the answer remains hidden. For every story that described giant reptiles lurking beneath the streets, there were voices that pushed back. Scientists, city officials, and zoologists all insisted that the idea of sewer alligators surviving for years, let alone decades, was impossible. And on the surface, their arguments made sense. Alligators are reptiles native to warm, humid climates. They are cold-blooded creatures, meaning they depend on external heat sources to regulate their body temperature. In the wild, they bask in the sun, soaking in warmth to fuel their metabolism. Without sufficient heat, they become sluggish, unable to hunt, digest food, or even move properly. The sewers in New York City, far from being a tropical paradise, were cold, damp, and filled with icy water during the long winters. Scientists argued that any alligator flushed into that environment would not last long. Then there was the matter of food. In Florida's swamps, alligators feast on fish, birds, turtles, and small mammals. But in the sewers, what would they eat? Rats are plentiful, yes, but could they truly sustain a population of massive reptiles? And what about breeding? The idea of an entire colony of alligators beneath the city would require not just survival, but reproduction. Could eggs hatch in the dark, filthy environment of an underground tunnel? Skeptics laughed at the thought. To them, the math did not add up. City officials were equally firm in their denials. Whenever sensational stories hit the newspapers, spokespersons quickly dismissed them as myths. Sewer inspectors explained that while rats, stray dogs, and even the occasional lost pet might find their way underground, the idea of full-grown alligators thriving there was beyond belief. If they were down there, one official once remarked, we would have found them by now. Yet, despite these logical arguments, the legend persisted. Why? Because logic does not always defeat imagination. In fact, sometimes denial makes a story stronger. Each time officials dismissed the idea, people grew more suspicious. Of course, they would say that, some argued, the city would never admit something so terrifying. The very act of denial became fuel for conspiracy, a reason to believe the story might be true after all. And then there were the eyewitnesses. Sewer workers who swore they had seen something they could not explain. Residents who claimed they spotted scaly bodies slipping into storm drains after heavy rain. Teenagers who swore they had pulled an alligator from the muck. Eyewitness accounts may not always be reliable, but they carry emotional weight. People trust stories told with conviction, and when someone looks you in the eye and insists they saw something, it is hard to completely dismiss it. Another fascinating detail is how the legend evolved over time to answer these scientific objections. When skeptics said the sewers were too cold, believers responded that the alligators had adapted. They became albino, their eyes glowing red, their bodies pale from the absence of sunlight. When critics argued there was not enough food, the legend suggested that rats, millions upon millions of them, provided an endless supply. When experts said alligators could not reproduce underground, storytellers whispered of secret nests hidden in chambers no inspector had ever reached. The legend itself was alive, changing shape to survive each challenge, just like the creatures it described. And perhaps that is the most powerful aspect of folklore. It does not need to be bound by science. Legends thrive in the space between what is possible and what is believable. Still, some investigators did attempt to seek the truth. Throughout the 20th century, there were occasional reports of alligators being found in unusual places. In 1937, one was allegedly pulled from the Bronx River. In the 1950s, a few small alligators were captured above ground in city parks. And in the 1980s, a well-publicized case involved a young alligator discovered in a Harlem apartment, living in a bathtub. Each of these cases seemed to confirm the possibility, if not the certainty, that exotic reptiles were indeed present in the city. But do these isolated incidents prove the existence of a hidden underground colony? Or do they simply show that individual pets sometimes escape, only to be captured before they can establish themselves? The answer remains murky. Science tells us the odds are slim. Folklore tells us the odds do not matter. What matters is the thrill of the story, the image of monsters lurking where we least expect them, and that image of a sewer system crawling with ghostly, half-blind reptiles continues to haunt the imagination. Each time you hear water rushing beneath a manhole or glimpse the dark mouth of a storm drain, the question lingers. What if, today, nearly a century after the first whispers of reptiles in sewers, the story of the sewer alligators remains one of America's strangest and most persistent legends? It is told in classrooms and on playgrounds, in books and television shows, and by tour guides eager to thrill wide-eyed visitors. Ask a New Yorker about the legend, and you may hear a laugh, a shrug, or even a knowing smile. Whether they believe it or not, almost everyone has heard it. Part of the legend's power lies in its adaptability. Every generation reshapes it, adding new details to fit the times. In the 1930s, it was about careless pet owners flushing unwanted reptiles into the underground. By the 1950s, it became a story of workers battling monstrous albino creatures beneath the city. By the 1980s and 1990s, it evolved into a cultural icon, appearing in comic books, horror movies, and even children's cartoons. Sewer gators became a symbol of the weirdness and mystery that lurks just out of sight in everyday life. The truth, of course, is far less glamorous. Zoologists continue to insist that no population of alligators could survive for long in the harsh environment of northern sewers. And yet, isolated incidents keep the flames alive. Reports of stray alligators turning up in rivers, ponds, or city street surface from time to time, often trace back to the illegal pet trade. Each new discovery reminds the public that the line between myth and reality is thinner than we like to believe. But perhaps the real question is not whether sewer gators truly exist. The real question is why we want them to exist. Legends are not always about facts. They are about fears and fascinations, about the way human beings use stories to explain the unknown. The idea of monstrous reptiles lurking beneath our feet speaks to something primal. It taps into the unease we feel about the unseen places of the world, the tunnels, the caves, the shadows we cannot easily explore. Urban legends also serve as mirrors, reflecting society's anxieties back at itself. The sewer gator story reminds us of the consequences of human recklessness, buying exotic pets without responsibility, treating animals as disposable, or believing that we can bend nature to our will without consequence. In this sense, the legend is more than entertainment. It is a warning wrapped in mystery, told in whispers so that the lesson lingers. And then there is the simple thrill of the unknown. Imagine walking through a crowded American street, the noise of cars and conversations all around. Beneath your feet, hidden behind a steel manhole cover, is a world most people will never see. It is dark, wet, and endless. In that darkness, the mind begins to wander. What if the stories were true? What if eyes were watching from the shadows, waiting for movement above? The chill of that possibility is enough to make the legend feel alive, even without proof. This is why the sewer gators endure, not because of evidence, but because of imagination. The legend thrives in the spaces between science and story, fact and folklore. It survives because people love to wonder, to ask questions without answers, to believe in the possibility of monsters hidden in plain sight. So the next time you walk across a manhole cover, pause for just a moment. Listen to the faint rush of water below, the echo of a world that exists parallel to your own, and ask yourself, what might be moving in those shadows? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps only rats and rushing water. Or perhaps, just perhaps, the old stories are true, and somewhere in the depths, an alligator waits, unseen but very real. The truth may never be proven, but the legend lives on.